Now for Media Watch, and I'm joined here by James Creedon. Good evening, James.
Hi, Sanam.
So we want to kick off with this fake news scandal in France that actually might not be a fake news scandal after all.
Right. I think it shows, it's an interesting one, the story, because there is a perception at large now that news channels are complicit with certain political leanings more often than they're not. And I think what we're seeing with this story is people getting a little bit ahead of themselves and a little bit paranoid about what happened. So just to tell you what happened, Cnews, one of the main rolling news channels here in France, they broadcast a report about Emmanuel Macron visiting his holiday home in Touquet. And what you see in this report is images of him arriving. I'm not going to show you can see here in particular, he's welcomed by the locals, except some of those images date from 2017, towards the beginning of his presidency, when there was quite a lot of, he was quite popular. Since then, of course, he's had the Gilets jaunes protests, and there's been a lot of booing when he arrives at certain venues. So you could argue that showing those images nowadays in the current context is deceptive, to say the least, at a time when he is dealing with quite a lot of social unrest. In any case, you have Juan Branco, who's recently written a book that is very critical of Emmanuel Macron and power circles in France, saying that this is an enormous, what would you say, deception, broadcasting images where the crowd is welcoming him. This is, basically unacceptable manipulation. Marianne, a left-leaning website, also talking about how CNews is fantasizing about this crowd welcoming Macron in Touquet. You had tweets going up online as well, pointing out all of this with kind of red circles around here. What a disgrace! Actually, the old images were from 2018. I correct myself. And then you even had tweets in English. French TV channel CNews shows scenes of Macron visiting Touquet with no sign of the usual hostile residents. But what they didn't say is the footage was from last year. Talk about fake news. Now, the reality here is that it was a young journalist, a freelancer, who perhaps didn't have enough images to fill up the 1 minute 30 that she needed to fill up for the report. And she has now basically been fired. But there was all of this perception that because the channel is owned by Vincent Bolloré, who is seen as a supporter of Emmanuel Macron, that this was all some big conspiracy. And you can see here even tweets, CNews owned by Canal+, Vivendi, which is the boss of which is Bolloré, etc., Ami de Macron. So I think it's a very good example of the extent to which people think they're on the right track, that there is some fake element, and then they build it up into this absolute fake perception of fake news, I think, to say the least. And that journalist, who certainly made an error, which should have been caught actually by the senior editors in the channel, I think she's paid the price for this, and some people are feeling a little bit sorry for her in the midst of all of that.
Let's stay with Macron, if we can. Of course, we know that he's gearing up for his speech this Thursday, which was cancelled the previous week because of the fire in Notre Dame. But of course, all this is happening against the backdrop of a scandal that's affecting his party in the upcoming European vote. That's
right. Just to transition to that, this is a cartoon about his break. He's taking a little break in Touquet, and it's a cartoon saying, Brigitte, have you seen the notes for my speech this Thursday? Because, of course, he cancelled his speech last Monday. It's now going to be delivered on Thursday, and the speech is on fire. In any case, there is a certain amount of talk online about how the break he had, if you like, in terms of managing the whole Notre Dame crisis and drama, it's kind of over now. He's going to have to face the political music again, or the social unrest. And this is rather unhelpful. Nathalie Loiseau, who is leading his LREM party into the European elections, she was the former European Affairs Minister. It turns out that as a student, she actually had some affiliation with a far-right party. Now, this page is full of ads, unfortunately, but she's pleading une erreur de jeunesse, an error of her youth. She's correct. She's very critical, in fact, of Mediapart for coming out with this story, saying that it's really kind of unfair, although Mediapart is saying, look, you should have probably told, you should have been more transparent about this already. And if your political leanings are completely other since your student days, then why not just tell all before people find out about it? So you can see here she's trying to, basically saying that it was an error of judgment. She spent 35 years fighting the good fight against the far right and extremism and whatnot. But even below that tweet with that kind of video, the explanatory video, look what you have. This is how things. The mud sticks. That's the problem with something like this. And she's being presented here as a fascist. This is to kind of just quickly work through some of this. You have Edwy Planel, the journalist who owns Mediapart. This is how it's being presented as well. In other words, you take off the mask and she's perceived as Marine Le Pen. It's very unfair, I think, in some respects, but it is, I suppose. It's just correcting the historical narrative.
Political climate that
but
sticks, yeah.
it doesn't bode well for her going forward in European elections when she was actually trying to combat Marine Le Pen.
James, let's move on from France to China, if we can. And we've got some images that aren't necessarily for the faint-hearted.
They're definitely not. These are construction workers in the center, in central China, in a transmission tower. This is about 50 meters up in the air. And what they're doing is they're taking a nap. These are images from South China Morning Post. They actually go back a week or two, but they're still going viral. And basically, they are secured by cables and whatnot. But it's
Is this a joke? Are they actually sleeping?
They are sleeping, because the thing is, they spend the whole day up there and it would take them too long to get back down. So they go for these little naps upstairs. Anyway, it reminded me of this extraordinary image in New York City from 1932, lunch break on a skyscraper or whatever it was called. I guess you're seeing the same sort of frenzied construction going on now in China with the same sort of brave kind of scenes from construction workers. I couldn't do it, that's for sure.